Is Susan, and I am president of Eastern Mennonite University, and I am really honored and humbled to serve this faith-informed peace and justice university. Yes, even in a pandemic, our noble mission at EMU is more relevant than ever to prepare students to serve and lead in a global context, and to do that in the spirit of Micah 6:8, to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. The first thing you should know is that even in a relentless pandemic where there were no in-person visits for prospective students and their family for 2 years, our enrollment across the board has remained surprisingly strong. This morning, I want to offer some brief reflections on the topic, revelation in chaotic times, reclaiming the gift of community and Christ's calling as we celebrate Easter. So first, let's unpack the meaning of revelation. That's a powerful word, revelation. Here are some of the synonyms of revelation: uncovering, unveiling, vision, eye-opener, epiphany. Epiphany means divine insight, showing, exposure. So if revelation means vision, uncovering, unveiling, eye-opener, what's the opposite of revelation? What's the opposite? Throw out some antonyms, opposites. Darkness. Ignorance. Absolutely. I think I would submit to you with darkness and ignorance that the answer to the opposite of revelation is blindness. Covered, veiled, eyes closed. Sometimes we really don't want to see what is right in front of us. Wasn't that the premise of the end of the world comedy, Don't Look Up? Scholars are already studying the eye-opening revelations, the unveiling of our blindness regarding our distressing experiences throughout the pandemic. For instance, in his article, Pandemic as Revelation, Professor Sidram Venkapuran argues in the Journal of Global Ethics, the pandemic has provided us with the nearest we have to an earth-shattering modern revelation, even to atheists. He quotes the eminent thinker Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who says this: "Here in the West, and specifically in the United States, we suddenly see our vulnerability. We've been coasting along for more than half a century in unprecedented affluence, unprecedented freedom, unprecedented optimism, and all of a sudden, hard stop. We are facing the fragility and vulnerability of the human condition. And at the end of the day, we have to say either we work together and survive, or we work separately and perish. Put simply and starkly, the article indicates, we must take actions that are more balanced between I and we." The study goes on to note that sometimes it takes cataclysmic moments unlike anything we have experienced before to see how much we need each other and how the major issues of the day are all so intertwined, such as rural-urban inequities in healthcare access, stark disparities in the negative effects of the pandemic and climate change on persons of color, the special, though underappreciated value of the real essential workers in society, and our serious underpreparedness for public health emergencies. These vulnerabilities were always there. We are just no longer blind to the way they intersect and threaten even civilized societies. Here at EMU, we experienced many revelations. Number one, we learned the wisdom of an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. When governors banded together, cases of COVID went down. When universities banded together, better COVID protocols were created. When we listened and participated in conversations with local and state governments and health officials, we could stay ahead of at least some of COVID's mysteries around transmission. And when our campus community came together, faculty, staff, and students, we were especially resilient. This past weekend, 2 of our current students, one a first year from Dallas, Texas, one a sophomore from Baltimore, Maryland, both women of color, shared with over 100 prospective students and their families how they survived and even thrived at EMU during the pandemic. Both of them learned some stark realities that isolation and masking and no large indoor gatherings created for them and their peers, starting, as they said, with study habits. They weren't good. So they approached their teachers. "We need help," they said, and they got it in extra study sessions for their difficult STEM subjects. "We need extensions on papers," and they got it. "We need more outdoor class time where we can be without masks," and they got it. "We need stress relievers and trauma-informed pedagogy," and they got it. In short, they expressed their utmost appreciation for, as they put it, the unbelievable ways in which instructors, mentors, and coaches at EMU truly walk alongside students to see their success in such a relentless, disruptive, and disorienting time. Second, we learned the wisdom of Scripture. It is not an exaggeration to say that Jesus' entire life and legacy is devoted to the power of redemptive love for all, especially in the face of life's uncertainties and calamities. Further, God never asks us to go on spiritual journeys alone, to spread the good news of the gospel by ourselves, or to think for 1 minute that in cataclysmic times we should ever utter, "I alone can fix things." The EMU mission invokes Micah 6:8 to do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. A lesser-cited passage, but one so very relevant for us in responding to the distress and disorientation of COVID, is Micah 7:8. "When I fall, I shall rise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me." Indeed, let's now look at an amazing parable that illustrates this revelation. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me. You know the story. It is the story of how Jesus heals the blind man in John 9. Here it is. As he was walking along, he saw a man blind from birth. "Master," his disciples asked him, "why was this man born blind? Was it a result of his own sins or those of his parents?" "Neither," Jesus answered, "but to demonstrate the power of God, all of us must quickly carry out the tasks assigned us by the one who sent me, for there is little time left before the night falls and all work comes to an end. But while I am still here in this world, I give it my light." Then he spat on the ground and made mud from the spittle and smothered the mud over the blind man's eyes and told him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." So the man went where he was sent and washed and came back seeing. His neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, "Is this the same fellow, that beggar?" And the beggar said, "I am that man." Then they took the man to the Pharisees. Now, as it happened, all of this occurred on the Sabbath. Some of them said, "Then this fellow Jesus is not from God because he is working on the Sabbath." Then the Pharisees turned on the man who had been blind and demanded, "This man who opened your eyes, who do you say that he is?" "I think he must be a prophet sent from God," the man replied. The Jewish leaders wouldn't believe he had been blind until they called on his parents and asked them, "Is this your son? Was he born blind? If so, how can he see?" His parents replied, "We know this is our son, and yes, he was born blind, but we don't know what happened to make him see or who did it. He is old enough to speak for himself. Ask him." So for the second time, they called in the man who had been blind and told him, "Give the glory to God, not to Jesus, for we know that this Jesus must be an evil person." "I don't know whether he is good or bad," the man replied, "but I know this. I was blind, and now I see." "But what did he do?" they asked. "How did he heal you?" "Look," the man said, exasperated, "I told you once. Didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" Then they cursed him and said, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know God has spoken to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't know anything about him." "Why, that's very strange," the man replied. "He can heal blind men, and yet you don't know anything about him?" Furious, they shouted, "Are you trying to teach us?" And they threw him out. When Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man and said, "Do you believe in the Messiah?" The man answered, "Who is he, sir, for I want to?" "You have seen him," Jesus said, "and he is speaking to you." "Yes, Lord," the man said, "I believe." And he worshiped Jesus. Then Jesus told him, "I have come into the world to give sight to those who are spiritually blind, and to show that those who think they see, well, they are blind." The Pharisees who were standing there asked, "Are you saying that we are blind?" "If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty," Jesus replied. "But your guilt remains because you claim to know what you are doing." The grand irony of this parable, of course, is that the story is really not so much about the disability of physical blindness as it is the disability of spiritual blindness. And which healing is more important? Jesus leaves no doubt. "I have come into the world to give sight to those who are spiritually blind, and to show those who think they see that they are blind." From this memorable parable of Jesus, we get from the blind man that great line, "I was blind, but now I see." The most recognized line from the most famous hymn in the world, Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace has been recorded nearly 7,000 times. It may be the most recorded song on the planet. Who wrote Amazing Grace, and why does it resonate so universally with us? Well, it happened in December of 1772 in England. At the age of 47, a man by the name of John Newton began writing the hymn. Newton began his life's career by searching throughout the African coast for slaves to capture and eventually sell for a profit. On one such journey, Newton and his crew encountered a storm that swept some of his men overboard and left others who were likely going to drown. With both hands fastened on the wheel of the boat, Newton cried out to God, saying, "Lord, have mercy on us." And after 11 hours, the remainder of the crew found safety after the calming of the storm. From then on, Newton dated March 21st as his day of revelation, a day he would always set aside for a time of humiliation, prayer, and praise. "To the one who saved a wretch like me," he said. Upon arriving safely home, Newton did not venture out to seek more slaves. Instead, he accepted requests to speak about his conversion in front of various congregations. Newton was eventually ordained and began to lead his own church. God changed him from a man who was an advocate of the slave trade to a man actively working towards abolishing it. Now, in the hymnal used in my church, Amazing Grace is not part of the Easter ensemble of hymns. And yet I'm told by music directors that it really is an Easter hymn in so many ways. The story of Easter is an anthem to the penultimate revelation. Jesus is not dead. The empty tomb is not the end. And yet it is also a story of temporary spiritual blindness, even from the very people who knew him best. Think about this. In John 20, we find Mary Magdalene, while it is still dark, going to the tomb. She sees that the stone has been removed from the entrance. She runs to Simon Peter and says, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." And as she weeps, she bends over to look into the tomb and sees two angels where Jesus' body had been. And the angels ask, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she says. "I don't know where they have put him." And at this, she turns around and sees Jesus standing there. But she does not realize that it is Jesus. Jesus asks her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, Mary says, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go get him." Jesus then says to her, "Mary." And at this, she recognizes that Jesus is here in front of her. Mary Magdalene then goes to the disciples with the amazing news. "I have seen the Lord," she says. The eye-opening revelation, the spectacular vision, the unveiling for the ages, for Mary and the disciples and for all of us. In closing, remember, Jesus came to us so that we may more clearly see the path of salvation. He came to take the blinders off so that we can see God clearly, even in a pandemic-weary world. Like the blind man from the Gospel of John, like John Newton from England, may we proclaim again this Easter Sunday, "I once was blind, but now I see." Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Thank you.